My favorite story on that whole issue is Al Alcorn's story of while he was walking through the house and his kids were playing video games and his wife saw they were playing the game. So, what are you doing? We're playing video games. Put that away. We don't play video games in this house. And he kind of stopped everybody and says, no, wait a minute. Video games paid for this house.
When we go places, when we do panel discussions, when we do interviews, podcasts, anything, just, was it last night or the night before we did one, people always want to hear the stories of the old days. One person calls it story time with Billy Mitchell. Another guy says, eat, story time, sleep. And sometimes I'm on there and someone will say, hey, remember that story you told about the guys that went to Life magazine and they never showed up for the photo? Tell that story again. And I feel like I'm, putting like a class to sleep or something. So, but here I can throw you under the bus because if I go back, it's, when I talk to you, whatever answers I have, you have more. And what I'm wondering is, when you go back to, say, the early 80s and even the 70s, let's not push it that far, but when you go back to the early days, there were people in your company that started with you and they left. And then things skyrocketed. Some of the people that left probably did very well, and some wish they didn't leave. I got a friend who was with Nintendo in the early 80s, and I said, why did you leave? And he goes, I ask myself that every day. And so, I don't know, I was wondering if you obviously stuck with it, or at least for a period of years, and had your success, but I was wondering if you would kind of like speak to that.
I don't know that there are any real, interesting stories about that. 4 of us left Atari to form Activision.
Right.
And we left people behind, but then some of those people were spun off to make a Magic, and others went on to do other things. Larry Kaplan was one of my co-founders at Activision, and he was kind of a hippie anyway. As the company got bigger, he was not interested in being involved in the bigger company, and he left. I don't think he ever had any regrets. He was actually at Berkeley in the 60s. Yeah. So when I call him a hippie,
he has a more interesting history.
That's right.
Yeah. That's a whole nother segment.
But no, I mean, it's actually a difficult business to be involved in. I mean, everybody thinks making video games is just fun and games, but I work many all-nighters, and we work really hard just to make the game fun near the end. And so it's not for everybody.
I would imagine the ultimate crunch time would be preparing for a show. Because you got to be prepared to present.
Sort of. I mean, the show is secondary. It's getting the product out is the hard thing. And we used to say that we did 90% of the work on the last 10% of the product. And that's because it has to be polished and it has to play really well, or else people wouldn't care to play it.
The so-called you're only as good as your last game, would that fit what you're talking about?
It does. At Activision, we were the young upstarts. And but Gary Kitchen likes to tell the story of when he first saw Activision games in the store. He said, well, these are going to be crap. They're not Atari. Mm-hmm. And so we were pushed by our own work at Atari and had to make our games better than those just to get noticed, because we were such, we were the small guys new guys on the block. So yeah, you always have to be, you're pushed from behind by your own work. You always have to be better than your last work. And in my case specifically, I mean, I've published pretty well close to 100 games on 25 different consoles. And yet I come to a show and I'm Mr. Pitfall.
Yeah, that's true. Some things never die. Well, maybe because you guys were younger, maybe you were hippie-ish, maybe because you left a dinosaur of Atari, or short industry, but what's considered a dinosaur. Certain things, as I look back in the early 80s, that put you guys on the cutting edge. Game players were welcomed in the trade shows near zero. I mean, zip. If you were the old guy who owns an arcade who walks through there, they'd roll out the carpet for you. Obviously, distributors, they'd roll the carpet out for you. And the other game designers, other game executives. Well, they were your drinking buddies, so they were very welcome. But you, as I look back, your company was the first one I can recall who really embraced gaming. Come in the booth and play, watch. You actually, of course, you had people that I know who were even brought to the show to play, to show off.
Right.
And that was just unheard of then. And I don't know if you got patted on the back for that, or were you ridiculed by the dinosaurs in the industry? Were you contaminating the situation, or were you taking it in a new direction? I don't really know the answer.
Actually, it's little known fact that the trade shows, which were for the trade, you were supposed to be in the business to be invited at all, were also limited to 18 and over. And you had to get special dispensation to go into those shows if you were below 18. And most of our target market were 16, 17-year-olds. And in fact, when we brought in players like Todd Rogers, I think he was not yet 18. We had to get special dispensation just to get him in the door.
Yeah, I see. 64, yeah, he was 17.
Yeah, so there was that. You're remembering an old school, good old boy network and not interested in the players, but they really didn't want anybody who wasn't even in the business, and it was difficult actually to get players in. Now you go to E3 and they open it up to the public and you can come and play, and it's a lot different now.
I have a little different perspective than Billy, because I manufacture products in my industry, and as you look at that, he says you're only as good as your last game. I find you're only as good as, one, the quality of your product and your distribution chain. So how did you get into the distribution chain and have such wide acceptance?
Well, we spun out of Atari with 4 creators of video games, and fortunately we ran across Jim Levy, who was a friend of the lawyer we were working with for incorporating the company, and he had had some experience with the video game, or with the software business, fledgling software business, and worked for the record company, record business. So he had marketing skills and management skills, and it was perfect. So we were the creators and he was the business guy, and it worked out very well. He knew how to promote products, he knew how to promote people. That's why our names were on the games, is because we were a commodity. And people liked that. If they liked a David Crane game, they wanted the next David Crane game, and so the name had to be on the box for them to know that.
They wanted to be able to blame you.
They could blame me or enjoy the game. So there was a lot of that, but we were innovating every day technically in making video games. Well, the company was also innovating every day in how to sell video games, how to distribute video games, how to market video games. And the industry owes Activision a lot from a lot of those technical issues, but they also owe a lot to changes in the business and figuring out how to actually sell video games.
And I think that was a point that I've never heard anybody address, so I wanted to make sure I asked you.
In my research, well, in reality, as we were playing, and it was 1981 and 82 and 83, and there was such and such a home game and system. As arcade people, we laughed at them, we scoffed them. I mean, they were stupid. They were bound to fail. They would never be worth anything. And as I did my research as the years went on, I learned that the industry at different meetings, the so-called AGMA, which basically the manufacturers got together and all they did was fight. They expressed tremendous concern that home games would become a problem for them financially, all the way back even in the late 70s, and I would have no idea that would have been the case. Well, obviously you did not have all your eggs in the coin-op industry.
Right.
And is that by good fortune, good luck, or did you see the situation was going to turn away from the arcades and the true larger business was going to be in the home business, in the console business?
Well, there was no doubt that the home video game business was going to be huge. We knew it was going to be as big or bigger than the movie industry.
About at what year did this come to your
In the late 70s.
Wow.
But you see, Atari actually built the Atari 2600. And they did that because they had a bunch of arcade hits, and they wanted to take their arcade hits home. So they wanted to sell you a system that you played at home, but they were planning on putting their arcade titles out on this home system. So that was really the reason they made a home game system, was to put their arcade games on them and sell them in the home. So they don't just take a quarter from you, they take $200.
Right. Initially, you played Space Invaders in the arcade, you played it at home, you played Cubert in the arcade at home. At a certain point, though, the home business became so strong, games went straight to the home business and skipped the arcade.
That's true.
Again, is that a vision that you saw coming?
Oh, no doubt. But like I said, before Space Invaders, even earlier, Atari had Combat, or Tank. And so the
1976, I think.
Yeah, and the cartridge they impact with their home game system was Combat, which had Tank in it, as well as Pong. So that was their whole point, was to make home versions of their arcade games, and that's why they made the system. When we spun out of Atari, Activision didn't own any arcade games. So we had to start creating original titles, and they were going to go straight into the home only. So Activision was the prototypical developer and publisher of a third-party publisher of video games. And so arcades didn't play into it because we didn't have an arcade division. So, Activision and every company that came after Activision had to come up with original concepts, and they went right into the home instead of going to the arcade.
Because I look at it now and I see home games that are, let's face it, I mean, technology, they're incredible. I mean, nothing can match. Whether the gameplay is as good or better than the old days, that's another thing, but the technology is, it could even get by on its good looks. And I say to myself, damn it, as a point-out guy, why can't they take that and now put that in an arcade cabinet? Reverse engineer it. And the fact of the matter is they don't do it because it doesn't make money.
Right.
If it made money, they'd be doing it. And I was wondering at what point that crossover was, where I guess home games became more important. You could see it in advance coming, and then eventually it happened.
Yeah. The difficulty for us was we were doing home games on a console that cost $200, and our competition as far as gameplay was concerned were arcade games that cost $3,000. Mm-hmm. And each year, if the arcade engineers wanted to add more sprites or more colors or more sounds, they would just add more hardware. We couldn't do that. We were designing games for a system that's already in Grandma's house. Mm-hmm. It's there, and so we had to get much more creative about how we manipulated the existing hardware. But at the time, arcade hardware far outstripped home hardware. Well, of course, that ended up turning around. I don't know when that would be. It could be the Super Nintendo, it could be the Neo Geo, it could be the PlayStation. At some point, the home console had more power than anything that was being put in the arcades. Mm-hmm. And arcade mentality had reduced. You spent how many years of your youth at an arcade?
Too many.
Too many, yes. Now you would, if you were growing up in this culture at that age, you would just be in your bedroom playing PlayStation, Xbox.
This is my son, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I keep digging at that turning point because it was such a turning point. For example, when you and we'll say the other three left Atari, did you see something or have a vision that the rest of Atari didn't? Or did you simply just want to go off on your own? Did the four of you have a collective thought pattern that you wanted to execute? Or were you actually moving away from something, meaning the arcade world, because you saw that vision?
Well, I wouldn't say we were moving away from the arcade world. We were concentrating solely on the home because, again, we didn't have an entire arcade business, which there's a lot of overhead to building an arcade machine, and it's a lot easier to make software for someone else's machine, which was our business. But there was no doubt that the home video game market was everything we could ever want it to be. I mean, it was going to be as big as the movie business. We could be part of it. We, you know, think about it. A movie is, you know, entertaining and visually appealing. Take all that and add interactivity, and it's better. So that's why video games are as big, or I guess the video game business is bigger than the movie business now.
Well, it's funny, when you talk about it in most interviews that I speak of the 80s, I say how it's well documented that because of the golden age of video games, because of the rise of video games, the movies and the music industry took a significant financial hit. It's not a secret, and it's well documented. And I don't know, I keep talking to you because I just think that you were there, and consciously or subconsciously, you saw the way the future was going.
Oh yeah.
Which would lead me to another question. So when you went and you created Activision and you determined the direction you were going, were you Johnny come lately? Were you the first company to do it? Were you the first one that simply said, we're going to attack the whole market and we're going to stay away from the coin op?
Well, again, we didn't consciously say we're going to stay away from the coin op. We simply didn't have all of the engineering that we needed, and we could get everything we wanted by doing home games. But Activision was, absolutely, it was the first third-party publisher of video game software, which meant, at the time, Atari made games for the Atari console, and Mattel made games for their Intellivision console, and Coleco made games for the ColecoVision console. Activision was the first to make games for someone else's console.
See, I keep twisting your arm to give you credit that you saw a vision that you were first, and I guess I finally got it out of you, but I also didn't know if there was another company, so
yeah.
I was.
No, we were absolutely the first.
Getting educated.
I was speaking at a game developers conference a few years ago to 600 people, and I asked for a show of hands. I said, how many people work for a third-party publisher? And it was everybody. Except, I guess I have to say, there were 6 guys from Sony who raised their hands for the first party. But the entire business in video games now is third party.
When you look back, you were first on that issue. You were, to the best of my knowledge, and I mean I was really on point back in the 80s, the first one to embrace or bring in players, the show, like you mentioned, Todd. I think that was 82 was the first time I was aware of it. It's funny, obviously you heard of Activision, I heard his name back in 82 and didn't meet him till 2002, how about that? But what other things can you look upon? You were the first third party, you were the first one to bring in and embrace game players in the convention. What other first would you credit yourself for? And if you weren't first, you were pretty close.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as we talked earlier, there were so many different business innovations that had to be made just to make a third-party publishing business work. We were innovating technologically every single day. You can look back at almost every game we did and say, okay, that was the first time there was, I don't know, thematic music that indicated emotion. Pitfall 2. You know, that was the first time that this was done. That was the first time that that was done. So it's almost hard to point out. There were so many firsts, it's hard to single out any one of them. But that's the nature of the beast. When you're the first guy doing something, you have to do unique stuff every single day.
When you did some of those, I'm assuming you had some crash and burn. I mean, some frustrations.
Some ideas that didn't work out, I don't know.
That's a hell of a good thing to say, I don't know. That's good. I wish I could say that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we had games where I worked 6 months on a game and it was never good enough to sell, and so it went on the shelf and never got published. So there were that kind of thing where game ideas didn't happen. I probably, the biggest mistake I ever made in analysis of game genres is I thought those punch-kick karate games would never catch on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wrong about that one.
Yeah. All right, well, then that's a big admission, because that's a hell of a big admission. You mentioned how different games just didn't get out the door. And when I was in 1999, when Masaya Nakamoto flew me to Japan, and I was there with him, and his development team and we were talking, one thing that I got out of him was they said about 20 to 1, the games that they put together or began to develop or even finished that did not get on the market, that they actually didn't put out, it was about 20 to 1. So if they're a 20 to 1, what are you?
Not anything at all that high, but then sometimes a game we'd have to turn it in a different direction and evolve it in a different way. But I probably shelved less than 20% of my work.
Wow, that's good, because some people would argue that shelved work is wasted dollars, certainly wasted energy.
Oh yeah.
And which leads me to the next question. There was a particular game they had, it was like a skiing game. Something to do with skiing. And I'm so sorry that obviously I don't know all the names, especially the ones from Japan.
It was called skiing.
Okay. And everybody was no, 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 bad, no, no. And Masaya Nakamura was yes, yeah, go, push it. And it went further and further, right to the point of development. And everybody said no, and he said yes. And they put it out. Well, he did have that authority.
Right.
And they put it out, and it was successful. Of the games that you put out, is there one that comes to mind that you or one of your associates fought against the rest of the gang to say, no, this goes out, and then it was successful?
I don't know. There's one funny story on that. Is when I was back at Atari, Boggle was a board game that you could play, a Parker Brothers game. You know, you'd throw the dice and you'd make words out of it. And in experimenting around, I made a Boggle game on the Atari 2600. And it got about halfway done. I got to where I could show it, and we had a discussion on that game with management. And they basically said, well, you know, we can't put out a Boggle game without calling it Boggle. And we can't call it Boggle unless we pay Parker Brothers a license fee. And then the etched-in stone quote from Atari is, and we don't pay license fees for games. Other people pay us to license our titles.
That's interesting.
And yeah, what video game publisher doesn't pay license fees, you know, on their games? Everybody.
Yeah.
But Atari says, no, we don't pay anybody. We make them pay us. So Boggle never went out. In fact, it was recently found. The ROM was found in the last couple of years, and you can find it and download it, but it was never a finished game.
It's funny you say that. Frank Ballou from Nintendo back in the day, and he says he remembers talking to me, and I'm flattered, but he doesn't. But they had a game they were going to release called Mario's Wrecking Crew. And way back in the day, they weren't going to release it, but he said to me, this is when I was messing around with the arcade here, he said, if you want, he says, I can get you the game if you want to have it. So it'd be an arcade game that really we'd only have, and just as a favor, he would do it. And I never took him up on it. And years later, I've told that story, and I didn't realize that creation from, say, 83 eventually got released in the home market.
Oh, yeah?
So I'm wondering if somewhere along the line your Boggle's going to pop out somewhere.
Yeah, no, it was never finished, but you never know. You actually will see some unfinished 2600 games re-released by their creators 20 years later. I've seen that happen. I think Rob Fulop found a couple and brought them out, but you know, Boggle is probably not going to be one of them.
Okay. Again, where I was before we went everywhere was what it is you want to stamp your name to, that you just saw the vision besides embracing players, and as I pick on Todd Rogers, putting him on the map as the first paid video game player, which aggravates me. What the hell does he think he is being first? I'm the guy that's supposed to be first.
Yeah.
But he beat me by a year. And again, the first one basically creating games third party, as you say. And I don't know. I'd have to look at the inductions that have come here over the recent years. Maybe you're the first in your category here, but I mean, I don't really know. I'm just picking on you for what else you were the first of. I don't know. Maybe
well,
you should.
It's like I said.
You want to go on and run for election? You'll be the first elected congressman or something?
I don't think so. It's like I said. We innovated every single day. There were so many firsts that it's hard to just pick one and go with it. But Activision has its place in the history of video games, and I'm proud of that history.
I sort of jumped out of my seat in 1999. There was the fun that I had, the good fortune I had. I'm the first one to say it. With Perfect Pac-Man, Masaya Nakamoto flew me to Japan, and that's a whole other story another time. But he said to me openly and publicly, and the reason why he could say this is when I had that good fortune back in '99 with Perfect Pac-Man, it was on a quiet weekend. There were no presidential speeches, no bombs went off, nothing. So it was a story that was easy to put on the front page on the 4th of July weekend. It was easy to, it just fell into place. I didn't even plan it, so that's my good fortune. And he said because of the attention that's gotten around the world, he predicted a resurgence in the interest of classic gaming. That doesn't mean a resurgence in money, but a resurgence in interest because it was on about the 20th anniversary of Pac-Man. Just like a car is an antique and a renewed interest, and you make all them comparisons, and that's terrific. But a little known story is a guy came along here and met with Walter, the Twin Galaxies, and he was a guy with $1 zillion, and he had an idea of creating a tremendous amount of competitive gaming, a company, leagues, everything that actually exists today. And that went on for quite a long time, more than a year of planning and putting together and 1,000 things, and eventually he pulled out, and it didn't happen. Oh well, it didn't happen. But I remember jumping out of my seat because, oh, well, we're talking to this company's interested in this, and this company's interested in that, and I go, well, what's the company, what's the main one that's like showing you the interest? Which one is, you think yours? He goes, oh, Activision's on the top of the list. Again, I'm picking on you. Once again, the vision of eSports and where it could go, and again, it didn't happen. I don't want to mislead anybody, but I just sort of jumped out of my skin because it made me reflect back on the early 80s, and again, even to the 70s, where you were the first pioneering certain things. And I realized, let's see, it was November of '99 when they made contact, and it went on for about a year, but they didn't get their feet entrenched until it was in the year 2000 when they were attempting to put thoughts together. And I know that's long after your time is gone.
Yeah.
But somehow the word Activision just sticks to that, sticks to pioneering, and I don't know.
David, I have a question to ask you. You and Billy, in your conversation, you were talking about how there are games that Atari have made that were never finished, and they've been shelved, and someone found the ROM online and stuff like that.
What do you call them, prototypes? Or?
These prototypes, has Atari ever released like prototype games and then in the beginning for like beta testing or whatever for displays at trade shows, and then later on, if it worked out and they said yes, good, release the official version that's like different from a prototype?
Well, it's not as common. It wasn't as common back then as it is now, largely because now video games are on disc, and you can produce a disc in an afternoon. And our games were on ROM, and it took 3 months manufacturing to make a ROM.
Ouch.
But once the game was very close to finished and we were going to show it at a trade show, we did make EEPROM versions, prototype versions, and in fact a lot of collectors have them. They are Activision plastic, but with a plain red label and just a Pentaflex sticker on it that says what its name is, that sort of thing. We made a bunch of those, both for showing at trade shows, and we would give them out to the press to review the game and that sort of thing. So there are prototype versions out there, but they're all very close to, if not exactly the same game that we end up publishing.
You had that with most games, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And with most games, did you have to go back and make revisions? Was the prototype basically a test? And did you use the media or friends in the industry as a test?
Very seldom was that the case, because before we were really ready to show them, we had tweaked the game down to the point where we knew it was bug-free, pretty much. The exception to that would be on the game Decathlon. I had finished the game and it had actually been sent off to marketing. And the next week, Activision was the subject of a Make-A-Wish wish. So a young child who was terminally ill, his wish was to come to Activision, see the lab, see the workings behind the curtain, and meet the designers and that sort of thing. And he was there. And we were actually filming his discussion with me, and we were playing Decathlon because he was going to get to be the first one to play this new game that's never been seen before. And he was distracted by the cameras and the questioning and started pushing the button in a certain way that showed me a bug on the screen. So I'm sitting there with a camera in my face watching a bug in the game that I had just released. And hopefully I had a good poker face and didn't show it on camera. But
yeah, I'd like to see that interview.
I would like to see that too, and see that moment when it occurs to me anyway. But I excused myself after that little meeting when we were taking a break from the filming and went over to manufacturing and said, "Stop the presses, we actually have a bug I've got to fix." And I remember I was told it's too late.
Had that been shown at trade shows and such?
It had been. Nobody else had ever seen this bug. And it was in the pole vault event that normally you would run with a joystick, you know, running as hard as you can. I don't know if you remember it, how physical that was.
I do. It was exhausting to watch.
And then and then you'd press the button to plant the pole. And then at a certain point you'd press the button again to release the pole and fly over the pole vault. And if you kept pressing the button after you released, he kept going higher and higher and higher and higher until he went off the screen. So that was a bug that I wasn't checking the button correctly. And so I remember the manufacturing saying, "It's too late, we've already sent them out, they're already making ROMs." And to this day, I'm not sure if there's a version out there that has that bug, and if we revised it, and some are out there with the bug, some are with, you know, fixed. I don't know. So there may be a game out there that has the bug that we only discovered during that filming.
No, that's a neat story because in the coin-op world, well, you ever notice in an interview, I just want to keep pulling it back to the coin-op world. I'm sorry, that's what I'm good at. But, for example, in Donkey Kong, we often call it the Japanese version. Mm-hmm. When you originally played, you'd go to the top of the ladder, people would say you put your hand up and the barrel wouldn't roll down on you. And that was out. It was everywhere in the arcade. And I remember all of us saying, "Ooh, yeah." We go, "What are you doing that for? Just go to the top of the ladder. They don't roll down on your head." The guy says, "Yeah, they do." "No, they don't. Let me show you." Yeah. And I show them and it rolls down on my head. I go, "What happened?" Again, they caught the correction and they sent it out. Or
it's real easy to change the ROM inside the box.
And it's, I mean, you would need a search warrant to find one of those games now. But when those things happen, it's kind of I don't know, it's like a treasure hunt for guys like us.
Sure.
That are into it. And you know, you say stop the presses. It's funny. I'm sorry. I'm going to go find that interview. Look at me. I'm tongue-tied. I want to see that with the kid who was there. No, that was awesome. I wanted to step back for a second. Again, going back to when I was in Japan, from Masaya Nakamoto and what he spoke of, and the 2 times I've been with Professor Tori Ayatwani, who designed Pac-Man. He worked on it for nearly 2 years, if I remember correctly, and he worked on it basically alone. And then he would say, "I need a sound guy." Then he would say, "I need a color guy," whatever he would need. And in the end, people that he pulled in temporarily to help him was about 6 people. And after about 2 years of toying with it and fighting, there was infighting. Masaya Nakamoto told me, or Toya Awatwani told me, that Masaya Nakamoto said all the ghosts should look the same. And the professor insisted that no, they need to look different and have different personalities. And he allowed the professor to win that argument, which was the right argument. But again, there was tug of war, but it was one guy working on it over a long period of time, then calling in people in their area of expertise. Subsequently, since then, having met with people who work on modern games, a game will take them a couple of months. How many people work on it? On this game, about 40 people. And I look at that contrast of the old versus the very new. And of course, when I say the old days, you worked on some of those old games in those days. And what was your timeline and the number of people? And because you're Mr. Pitfall, you could even speak to that one if you want.
Sure. Well, in the Atari 2600 era, in the late 70s and early 80s, it was one person, one game. Take a game like Pitfall, I came up with a concept, did the original sketches, drew every pixel of art, made every sound effect, wrote every line of programming, wrote the first manual. You basically do everything to make that game. And it's the way it happened at Atari, it's the way we were trained, it's the way we started out.
So it sounds similar to the story I've been told so far. The old day story.
That's the old day story. And so, those of us who were able to do that were kind of, you look at Steven Spielberg or George Lucas, I mean, they could sit behind a camera if they needed to. They could edit the film if they needed to. So they have all the skills to do all that. And as the game business evolved, you can take those skills, and I could manage a team of people. And as long as, I would bring in an artist who's a better artist than I am. I would bring in a sound effects guy who's a better sound effects guy. I'd bring in a music. I mean, I've composed music for video games, but I would bring in a composer because he's better than I am at that. And so you can bring in 10, 50, even 300 people into a project. It helps that you were able to do them all yourself. You could have done any one of those tasks, although not necessarily as well as the specialist, but you could have done it. It helps to understand, keep the vision, and manage the process. So it evolved from one man doing absolutely everything on every single aspect of every game to 100 people, 200 people, hundreds of people these days. But it's just an evolution that happened in small stages.
Compare the gamers of yesterday to the gamers of today. And since we're having fun, I'll say the games of yesterday were designed for one purpose, to take your money fast. And they did. And they took your money fast and you had to play. You took your money fast and you had to play. You didn't have the internet. Anything, any book or any guide to any game was just a fun book. It didn't help you pioneer a high score. And that's why I say, and I take a lot of flack, that the players of yesterday and the players of today on an equal footing, the players of yesterday would hammer. So my compliment again to you where I was driving this train was the knowledge and skill and ability that you had to have, comparing it to Steven Spielberg with what he had to have in the old days, is far greater than today. If I was unkind, I would say the guys of today know nothing compared to what you knew then in that field. When you say, because you would be moving along with the game and you say, okay, I need a sound guy, and you would call him in. But by that same token, you were so knowledgeable that if this expert you brought in was coming up short of what you wanted, if you thought he wasn't up to snuff, you knew well enough, no, this guy's out, I need a better guy. You're smart enough to monitor the guy or patrol the guy because you had to have that knowledge, because in the early days, you were the one-man army. Mm-hmm. And no, I put that together, and in the old days, somebody like yourself, for lack of a better term, was not easily expendable. Today, anybody who designs games is expendable.
Pretty much.
There's just too many people and too much technology.
Back then, our names were on our games, and that was because it was a product of our brains. I mean, we were 100% behind the game. If a game today has a person's name on it, it can happen, but that's because that person has the entire vision. He doesn't necessarily write every line of code or,
Man, I would have a hard time putting my thumb on a modern game that somebody has their name to.
Sid Meier.
Sid Meier, there aren't a lot, but there are people who, they literally, they had the vision, so they are enough in control of the process to deserve having their name on the title.
It's funny, the one that comes to mind, I remember there was Defender, Stargate, Robotron.
Right?
The past, now Robotron, the future. That was done by the Vid Kids, as we call them. Mm-hmm. We didn't know what that meant. We saw it on the game, the VidKids. And then we heard a game's coming out, and was it going to be good? Everything from the VidKids is good. It's going to be good.
Right.
And to be honest, it wasn't all that good. And it was Blaster, if you remember that.
Yeah.
Again, it came out at a tough time when the industry was struggling. But compared to the first three, no, that game was lousy.
Yeah.
But we liked it or we embraced it because it said the VidKids. And, wow.
Well, another thing in the arcade field that you'd be well versed in is you couldn't actually play a game this year unless you played last year's game. I mean, you actually had to learn the controls of asteroids before you could play Defender.
No, you're like, you couldn't take Algebra 2 until you took Algebra 1.
Exactly.
And it went on to calculus. Nobody stepped into calculus.
Right.
No, you're right. It was a progression. Yeah, you're right. You graduated your way through. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, I graduated through video game school. That's kind of scary. So, but everybody in your business, as far as their background, their education, their training, did everybody come down the same thing? Were there guys with just such gifts that they basically skip things? I mean, I look at the Fortune 400 or whatever, and all these guys, all these million and billionaires, and all of them went to school or to college, and this many didn't, and they're all born here, but there were 11 of them were immigrants, and 8 of them never even went to high school. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, the people who buck the system, the guy walks in with his resume and he's got everything there that would impress everybody. That's not always the guy that can do anything.
No, the primary source of video game creators in the 80s was engineers. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that was you had to understand the electronics inside the console to be able to do unique things with it. So you really had to understand the guts of what was going on.
You say engineers, but does that translate over to design as well?
Well, the video game field is a unique combination of skills. Left brain, right brain skills. I know people who are fabulous with technology that couldn't design a game that their life's depended on. And there are people who think of themselves as designers, but their ideas are so out in left field because they don't think about what part of this design can be made. I mean, it helps to be able to temper your ideas with what the technology is capable of doing. So the people in my group that made games were a unique combination of left brain and right brain skills. Extremely technical and extremely creative all at the same time, and that's how you make a game. So that person is that person, whether he goes to Stanford or whether he skips college. Mm-hmm. All right. So we had people from all different walks of life, some that were computer science majors, others that were electronic engineering majors, but it was really it was a crucible. Once you were said, here's the Atari 2600, see what you can do with it. And to have both the technical skills and the creative skills to do a fun game on a limited piece of hardware, that limited who was going to be successful at it by far.
Certain people developed areas of expertise. Certain people did that well on the Atari 2600, did less well on other systems?
No.
They were pretty much, if they were good, they were good?
If they were good at both the left brain and right brain skills necessary, they could design for any system. Now, people could be extremely competent technically and not have those design skills. And in the middle years and later years, it's easy enough to get a job in the video game business. You could be the guy who writes the physics engine. And that's all you write is the physics engine. But you're not going to be the guy who decides what's fun to play and does level layout and creature design or anything like that. But all the specialists, can all work together in a large group, so it doesn't matter anymore. Mm-hmm. Back when you were a one-man team, you had to have all those skills in one body.
Yeah. Again, going back to the skill, the talent, the knowledge, all of the credentials of the original guys in the industry compared to today. I mean, I guess I'm knocking the guys of today, and I am, but no, really, I'm drawing attention to the fact that if you didn't have all those skills, you would not have been able to create what you created. The industry would have had that negative impact or that hole in it, and we wouldn't have it. We wouldn't be talking about it today. I go over that over and over again. I say, the things that people are good at now, things that you could get people to do with games now. You could sit in a bar and for a pitcher of beer, you could find the right guy who would help you do something. And in the old days, there were the people in the world who could do something. Sometimes you could count them on your fingers only.
Right.
And it's just where we've evolved from.
But David, so think about very interesting conversation. I'm actually while I'm recording
By the way,
this,
he's
I'm
actually
learning.
a game historian.
Yeah, so a lot of this stuff is real good. I'm like, this is gold. The consoles today, right? When you make a game for a console today, and correct me if I'm wrong with my ignorance, I don't have any education on this, but the games today don't have much interaction with the console other than the consoles to just play the games. But the consoles yesterday, you had made a statement earlier that you had to understand the insides and out of the console to work with. Do you have any experience with the modern games on the modern consoles today to make a comparison between the consoles of yesterday with the games of yesterday?
Yeah, I've published games on 25 different consoles. Cool. So when it comes to understanding consoles, I'm the guy to talk to.
Okay.
But you're absolutely correct that these days, all the consoles have so much capability that they don't limit the game. And that's really the question you're asking. Is the Atari 2600 limited what the game could be because of what it's capable of? And the NES had certain capabilities, and so the game ended up being tailored to that game console. And that happened for lots and lots of consoles. About the PlayStation era and beyond, there wasn't really much in the way of limitations that you had to worry about when designing your games. You didn't design the game based on the limitations. And nowadays, you develop a game in Unity, and it exports a version for Xbox. It exports a version for iPhone. It exports a version for, whatever console you're going to be on. So you're completely isolated from the console in doing game development today.
See, my complaint is it exports to every one of those platforms you're talking about, and some things never change, like in me. It doesn't export out to the arcade, to the coin-op version. We
always bringing it back.
Except with MAME, of course.
Yeah, we get left behind.
See, the reason why I asked you this is because I've been playing video games since the Atari era and beyond. I'm born in '77, so by the time I got into the '80s, I never started with '80s consoles. I actually went backwards and then came forward.
Right.
That's because my friends who are older than me, they had the consoles from back in the late '70s, coming into the '80s. So that was the only thing that I could get access to. I was too young. My father wasn't buying me any of those consoles as a little kid. My first console I ever got was like an NES, but I played like an Intellivision, a ColecoVision, a Vectrex, a Atari, etc. And I noticed that in playing the games back then that I played, especially like Punch-Out, Super Punch-Out, Tetris Attack, I played a lot of console games. And I noticed something in today's era of games that does not happen in the old school era. You don't get a lot of glitches or exploits in today's games than you do in yesterday's games. Like, there's a Super Mario Brothers 3. There's this guy, I didn't even know this was even possible. He got 2 whistles, got to level 7, went into, like, I think level 7-2, did a bunch of different moves or whatever, and went into a warp pipe that's in the background that doesn't even exist. I never even see it. And it automatically puts him at the end of the game, and he beats the game. He walks into the ending and meets Princess Toadstool. You don't even finish the entire game. It's like a glitch that ends it. And I noticed like today's games, there is no glitch. Like you were saying, you do it in Unity, it exports to the system of choice, and it just runs like that. And my question is to you, why is that? Why is like yesterday's games had bugs, and they were not like not every system has
Not necessarily negative bugs either.
Well, no,
Just things that were unique.
but like what I'm trying to find out,
hidden.
I'm trying to figure out, the question here is the interaction with the cartridge versus the console. What are the things that creates those anomalies that happen in a game that doesn't happen today because the code's just written out and it just exports to the system?
Well, you're talking about an era where Easter eggs became common. They actually became marketing tools, so that the game magazines would pay more attention to your game. People would put in Easter eggs like that.
Oh,
The games were more complicated. It was like an exponential level of complication that happened around the NES and SNES time. And so they put in joystick functions that tested features so that it was easier to test and that sort of thing. So there are all these games where you do down, up, down, down, right, right, left, 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 right, and something happens in the game. Those were put in for testing purposes, and people ended up saying, hey, let's leave it in, and it becomes an Easter egg, and the magazines will get a hold of it, and everybody will love our game for it. So there was actually a lot of that stuff that was done on purpose, after the Easter egg was finally discovered in video games.
did they get that? Did they get that from the previous generation, from some of the like some of these, like for instance, this year, right? This year there was a game, one of your games, Barnstorming, and for a very long time, Barnstorming was considered like the fastest time you can get in Barnstorming is XYZ, and literally this year they found a glitch in the game where you hit the barn and somehow it makes it the fastest time. So there was like a TAS version of the game that they used to get the fastest time by a computer ever. But then they literally, this year, 2018, it was on Kotaku, you can literally look it up, and someone found a glitch where you bump it and bump the plane on the barn and it gives you a faster time. I don't necessarily know how that necessarily works. Now, was that an Easter egg?
No, that would have been a bug. We would put out games and, referring to score records and that sort of thing. The day before the game went live, I was the world record holder. Right? Okay.
You shouldn't have released it. You could still have the honor today.
I could still be the world record holder. But as soon as you put it out and 1 million people start playing it, not only do the scores get higher, people figure out different ways to play the game. Pitfall was designed to run to the right. But it turns out that if you die on a screen, you are dropped from the sky on the left side of the screen, past the obstacle. So immediately people said, well, I'm going to run to the left, so that if I die, I don't have to go through the obstacle a second time, because my new life is going to be past it.
Yeah.
Oh
Okay.
my God. You know what you just did? You just told the speedrun community on how to get the fastest Pitfall.
No, the speedrunner has to do it without ever dying, so it doesn't make any difference.
Oh, okay.
But, so immediately, millions of players would figure out different ways to play things. And I'm sure that when Steve Cartwright did Barnstorming, it was in his logic in his mind was that you can't get the highest score by ever hitting anything. Okay? So that would just have been a bug if that turned out to be the case. And that's interesting because there's been some controversy about what's the fastest Barnstorming score. And I didn't realize that somebody finally figured out there is a way to actually get faster than what was the test was done is take away all the collisions and just go as fast as you can. There's only so much speed you can get. Well, apparently you can get faster by hitting the barn. I don't know.
It's funny you mention that. By the time you're talking about the Kotaku article.
Yeah. That's this year.
But I'm going to tell you that probably there's somebody who learned something, but it's not yet written or publicized, that we'll learn about the next time we talk. I mean, that's how fast things change.
Yeah.
Going back to, as you were saying, Easter eggs and stuff, I'm trying to think of there was a game, and boy, maybe it'll come to me, but you played the game, you finished the game, and Gary.
You can cut the music?
I can almost say the name. You play the game, you put in your initials, and I remember the initials, MRS, and then it came up on the game. You put your initials in, and then a message came up. You have the same initials as my angel.
Yeah.
And then, like a year later, someone showed me, you put in a certain 3 initials, you have the same initials as my author. And obviously the game designer, somebody put that there.
Sure.
And all the possible names that could go in there, it was a lottery to hit that. And I'm wondering, did you ever leave a message or something in a game? Or were you tempted to and you didn't?
I never did, nor was I tempted to.
People you work with?
We had extremely limited ROMs. And it would have been, I would have considered it bad form if I wasted ROM doing something like that, either putting in an Easter egg or putting in just, something self-serving, when I could spend that amount of ROM on another enemy or whatever. And in fact, when Warren Robinette put the Easter egg in Adventure, I didn't think that was really a good idea. He could have made the dragon look less like a duck, if he'd used the ROM, right?
Yeah.
There's any number of reasons why you would want to use the ROM for the game, because the game was the star. Now, I understood his desire to be recognized, and that was part of the desire to leave Atari and form Activision. I mean, we liked more recognition. I just wouldn't use ROM, as precious as ROM was in those games. I wouldn't use it for that purpose.
We can document that as part of history. Why does the dragon look so much like a duck? Because he wanted to put that Easter egg in there.
I'm not saying that's necessarily the case, because the Atari 2600 is really hard to make something look like a dragon.
Right.
But that's just an example, is you could have used that ROM differently. And so what we did is we spun off of Atari and got our names on the outside of the box instead of using precious ROM to put our names inside the box.
Right. Wow. I'm curious, when you go to events, again, I saw you in Milwaukee, and it's really bad for me to make it sound this way. With all respect, I see you at the show in Milwaukee, and that's not now or then would it be the show where you'd be breaking your back. You were walking around, saying hi, shaking hands with people, friends, admirers, people asking questions, having fun, and that's what you do, and that's what you at that show, and that's what you should do, is have fun. I always say that pushing, promoting, glorifying competitive gaming at a show like that, that's what I enjoy. But my question to you is, when you take your window of time that you have now, how much of it, what do you actually do now, and then how much of it is just plain fun, enjoying what you created, the legacy, the friendships, the camaraderie you had? I'm assuming if you're like some of the people I mentioned, Gary, Frank Ballou, or you go to certain shows even just because you want to see friends. You go to certain shows because you relive the camaraderie. But I'm asking you in a nice way, what is it you do now?
Well, I go to shows because I like supporting the retro community. I mean, I love the fact that people are now caring about video game history and building museums and that sort of thing. And the video game industry was never very good at keeping track of its history.
Oh man, we could talk about that for a while.
I was speaking to Bobby Kotick just recently, and he has appointed an archivist. So there is an executive position that is the archiver at Activision. So companies are starting to take it seriously, and the guys down in Texas at the National Video Game Museum, their collection has finally found a home where they've got a museum. So I like to support people who enjoy retro and have the museums and that sort of thing. My day job, I do consulting work. I mean, I have very valuable skills going all the way back to the 80s, and I consult on patent litigation and help the courts understand what a patent means and how technology works. And so that's really my day job. But
so going to the shows and pushing, promoting, helping, creating camaraderie and interacting with people. When you go to a show, that's what you do. You're not actually in a booth working.
No, I'm not promoting anything that I've done. I am helping to support the retro community as much as I can.
So when people see you at a show, it's okay for them to approach you. They're not going to be interrupting your work.
My work is to say hello and answer questions about the good old days and sign games, whatever.
No, I find it so refreshing that you embrace so much the retro community that, again, I'm going back, you were the first company, to my knowledge, that embraced players, that embraced the consumer, put it that way. I mean, you're at a trade show and they're trying to sell something to a distributor, an operator, whatever. Well, go one step further, there's the consumer. And you and your people were probably the first company to reach out. And so now, all these years later, you're going back, still pushing, promoting, glorifying, and embracing the community of retro gaming. And I look back on it because I talk to people, and yes, there are people, companies, players, interaction. Boy, I mean, a big business. What happens now in what we call eSports. And as I look back in the old days, I tell people, I go, nothing, nobody. I could call me, and I guess I sound like I'm bragging, I could get a little activity from companies like Namco or Nintendo, and very little. Like at Nintendo, there was one guy, his name was Jerry. He was the youngest guy at the company, the most prolific gamer, and he was the guy bottom of the totem pole. So they said, you, take care of this guy. I mean, really, I was the most successful at reaching in. So now that I see the people back then who've come to this point, and I don't want to say you're relaxing, but you're relaxing in life, and you still look back at it fondly. You still look back on it, embracing it. And I look at that and I think, maybe I'm even playing the crybaby game, like, why weren't they more interested in us then? And because they were there to make money. I mean,
You notice something, David? I think Billy's jealous that Todd was the guy that got it and he did it.
Yeah, he got his foot in the door. So it's going to cost him a lunch next time. I'm not buying for him. No, but he, another time I'll tell you the story, how I heard about Todd. First time, how I heard about you, way back in the day, and all them years later, with the man in stripes there, they walked in, they sat in a restaurant. I walked over, I didn't have any idea what was going on. And I'll bore you with that another time, but it's, I just think it's so cool. And I think of the knowledge that I've gained through all these years. When you were 17 and 18 and 20 years old, you thought you were smart. I mean, I was an idiot, and maybe you were too. People say to me, don't you wish you could go back to when you were 20? No chance. That was a scary time. Could I go back to when I was 35? Yeah, I was kind of smart at 35. I could do that. But if I had the knowledge then, back when I was 17 or 18 or 20, and I could try to reach out and embrace the industry, I'd be better at it.
Well, let me give you a little parenting tip along those lines.
Please.
You get your kid to recognize a very simple truism. You say, you know, the expression is you learn something new every day. Mm-hmm. And you get your kid to recognize that they admit it. Yes, I learn something new every day. And then you say, how many more days have I been alive than you?
Yeah.